Hello and welcome to episode 27 of The Dive.
That's what I like to hear.
We are here in Wuhan after week 1 of the group stage, before week 2 of the group stage. I'm Jat with Azael.
Azael, it's me.
Yeah, Kobe.
Yes, sir. I'm here.
And our first-time guest, not Deficio, the European caster who didn't jinx them, Vedius.
Not Deficio.
Hello, this is not Deficio. It is in fact Vedius. Hello.
Yeah. So what did you think about Deficio's jinxing of the European teams on Twitter after Misfits beat TSM?
I mean, he's literally ruined our region. He's pretty much the sole purpose of our defeat right now. When Fnatic were in that close game against Immortals and Reckless saw Pobelter, in his mind he goes, how can I make Deficio proud? that was the moment that Deficio ruined us.
What's funny about that is, like, we're memeing about that, and Deficio got, like, a bunch of, I think, mostly joking tweets.
Mostly.
But in the LPL, that's an actual thing that the broadcast accounts for, because the fans are so passionate. They'll think, like, if this guy used to play on Team WE, he cannot cast Team WE, because when he gives analysis during the game about what they should have done, the fans just hate him for not giving them that advice beforehand and then blame the caster for the loss. So they don't let them broadcast those teams. So be careful, Deficio.
And that's
you do
why
not
we
want to turn
kicked him
into
off. You know?
That's why he's not here.
Same
Very serious. You know what I'm disappointed about is every time I watch Vedius content, I get the fantastic intro. So even though they couldn't see the intro, I was wondering maybe if you could just do an intro.
You were
for
hoping that
us.
I would do some
just like do a little dance
some
or something.
salsa or
He just did a salsa dance and took his shirt off. For those who
It
don't
was
know.
good.
I'm just going to say that was epic. I'll vouch for that one.
Okay, so let's do a quick recap of the first week. Korea lost a single game. NA did great, 6-3.
closing.
It's almost like they've never gone 6-3 before. It's exactly what they did last year and the year before, as far as overall records are concerned. But what was your biggest surprises, basically, of the first week of Worlds? Start with you, Kobe.
I'm not ready. Why are you starting with me?
All right, start with you, Isaac.
I mean, I think one of the big things that did stand out to me, although EDG has kind of failed in the past, I actually did give them the credit that they could do well in this group. I thought that it was like a very manageable group for them. Yes, C9 can look very strong, but AHQ traditionally people have very low expectations for, and this should have been a group that EDG was competing for second, right? Or even pushing for first. And although they did almost beat SKT, they had that one really amazing game. They end the first week 0-3. No one has ever come back to make it out of groups after starting 0-3.
I think Group D was probably the most surprising overall. Like, initially we all came in and we were like, Flash Wolves probably aren't going to be that good. And then we spoke to some of the teams and they're like, no, Flash Wolves is really good. And then I was like, oh, okay, I'm sold. Flash Wolves, they could be really good. And they have that really close game against TSM. And then they end going 0-3 and they actually don't look that amazing. And then Misfits suddenly finished 2-1, which is surprised
Especially
everyone.
after the first game, which was pretty bad.
Yeah, exactly, right? So I think Group D has just been full of surprises. And I still think that right now it's a super close race between W Misfits and TSM. They are all 2-1, so that would make sense. But I think Flash Wolves could cause a lot of upsets next week.
I'm technically the most surprised with RNG, actually. I did think that the LPL teams are usually like the second best region, but I just didn't expect them to have a deathless game against Samsung and also be undefeated in that group. So the level at which they have shown up so far was one of my biggest surprises.
I guess I would pose the question then, are you more surprised at their level or Samsung's kind of weaker level, you know? Because to me, RNG played well, but RNG didn't play like, wow, it's so beyond my expectations. It felt more to me like Samsung was below.
And that's going to be the question after the first week of Worlds, because there's always so much that changes between week 1 and 2, because specifically the Samsung versus Fenerbahce game was atrocious by Samsung to still get the win.
I have to say, though, even in that Samsung RNG game, I think the most surprising part was not that they lost, it was how they lost, right? Because it wasn't this, RNG are rushing them down with some crazy super early game aggression, right? It was some early lane swap, like they just swapped on the BF sword, took down the turret. It was actually a fairly slow game. And methodical for the early phases. Then they get a couple of picks, they win 2 team fights, and they just crush Samsung.
Yeah, and even the RNG game against G2, like even though G2's 1-2 only with their win against Fenerbahce, like I haven't seen RNG play like that before. Yes, they were the slowest team by average game time at Worlds, so obviously they can play late game, but that was still with this aggressive flair in the early game, where when they got to the mid game, they just kind of meandered around. Whereas this game, the RNG G2 game that surprised me so much is they picked the late game team comp. I thought Sven and Mithy played a perfect laning phase with Trist Lulu, rotating around and getting the 2 turrets snowball at the start of the game. But G2 just like warded well, never over-engaged, kept the gold close, and then only punished on the big team fights. That was just such a strong macro game from RNG as far as playing around the late game that it was just surprising.
The one thing I would point out that I feel like people are kind of overlooking is I actually think that for G2, I didn't feel like Expect got almost anything done at all on the Gnar. So it's like if you want to attack, you want to attack the pick or the player or whatever, or you want to attack the vision around that. Yes, he's playing against a Twitch, which makes it hard to split push. But if you're gonna pick a Gnar and build Black Cleaver, Frozen Mallet, and then go even with a Maokai and then team fight, like that's just not worth it, right? Yeah. There's not really a world in which that is then a good pick, especially when you're up against almost a pure AD comp. If he accepted that he couldn't split push, then to me you have to go like straight Randuins and these sorts of builds, but I just felt like when you compare how much Gnar got done in that game to even when you look at like the Haunter game on Gnar, right? Like you can see how much space a Gnar can create for their team, and Expect really got almost nothing done and then limited use in team fights.
My only counterpoint to that would be that watching that game, I thought that G2 intentionally tunneled everything onto Sven. Like they were moving him off onto side lanes all the time.
Then don't pick Gnar.
Yeah, that's fine, right? Yeah. Like I agree with you, but what disappointed me most about that game was I don't think in the team fight Sven played exceptionally well. The fact that he gets caught out mid by the Maokai, and the fact that his positioning in a few fights were a little questionable. Like I don't know if the pressure just got to him or if I don't think it was his greatest game, and it was a little surprising.
Yeah, it was also coincidence that just before that game, they put up the quotes. LoL Esports is putting up these quotes from all the players, and Sven's quote was, he's happy with this meta because he'd rather be the one to lose his team the game than have someone else on his team lose in the game, and he's the one who got caught, twice in that late game. So, you live and die by it, but he's happy to be in that position.
Kobe, do you have your most surprising thing?
Yeah, I'm surprised that you guys, none of you said the Fnatic opening was a surprising thing to you, because Fnatic going 0-3, and not only their on the Rift performance, but then the entire team like kaboom as far as the internal arguments going, and people are already coming out with, there's a bunch of behind the scenes drama, and the team is like falling apart from the insides. This kind of complete collapse after week 1 was super surprising to me. Whereas like EDG, going 0-3 or underperforming, it is surprising on the fact that like they're the number 1 seed for LPL, but they do have a history at Worlds of underperforming, as well as like being in the weaker sort of LPL group for Summer Split.
Yeah, and I think that transitions right well into just like going group by group for what we think is going to happen next week. We'll start based on the schedule, and Group B, which is Fnatic's group, is going to be the one we touch on first. The thing that surprised me, and this isn't even gameplay related, I never expected the dog champ meme to peak so perfectly. The literal game where he hovers the Nasus, it gets picked against them. And the thing about that is, I don't think, like, Longzhu aren't just dank Meebers, as dank as the interview afterwards was from Khan. They just actually had seen the matchup play out before and smashed with it. But that was one that was so simple that I just had fun saying dog champ for like 10 minutes. And now I'm probably getting a little sick of it, but it was amazing in the moment.
I mean, I think it's actually a really good matchup. And when you looked at the team comp that they had against it, it actually made a lot of sense, right? It's not like there's an aggressive early junglers, really. It's magic damage from the entire top side of the map. Nasus can itemize very easily to survive that sort of gameplay. And when you have like a free farm style lane and you don't get pressured very heavily by the jungler as a Nasus, it's super, super easy to take over a game like that. And that's why Soaz, I think, was so frustrated.
Yeah, I know everyone's super focused on that because it's so funny, but I actually don't think the Nasus was even a big part of that victory. Like, you talk about Nasus and you're going over the strengths versus tanks and stuff, and it's about this scaling and stacking up. This was the fastest game that we had at the entire world. It's like,
to be fair, he had over 400 stacks.
He didn't even have to, though. If you look at where they crushed the other lanes so hard, Prey and Gorilla were outstanding. And, you know, BDD gets like his main champions. It just, yes, Soaz was, you know, afterwards when he was tweeting out, he was pretty heated and kind of, you know, angry in the moment. But like, it wasn't the factor for the entire game,
No,
right? It
wasn't.
was the overall crush there from RNG.
I agree with it was a good matchup, and I do want to talk about Soaz for a little bit because of the salty tweets, so to speak, kind of throwing his team under the bus for not helping him. What's interesting about this is just the dichotomy we have to have when like analyzing the way you talk about your team in League. Because Khan said, hey, I got to play Nasus because the rest of my team was really good and they're able to support me. And we're like, oh yeah, awesome, humble. And then Soaz being like, yeah, this really sucked because my team didn't support me. And we're like, Soaz, you're salty. But literally the winning player said the same thing as Soaz. It's just you can't throw your team under the bus, in my opinion. Like, you always have to take one for the team, so to speak, and use your other avenues of internal communication to solve that rather than blasting them on social media, because that's just going to make matters worse.
That's to me is the big problem. It's not that he thought that, like, because it's true.
Because it's true. He was put in a bad situation by his team.
Maokai can maybe bully him a little bit at the start if you're saying the jungler's never going to be there. But this is a matchup you cannot win for long on your own. It's just the way it is. And you do need the jungler to come. But the problem, as you said, is that just destroys the team atmosphere. Like, when you feel like you're being thrown under the bus on social media, I feel like that it's immature, right? Like, it's one of those situations where you need to be able to deal with it straight up with your teammate. And I think this is something that, you know, while Soaz may stand by what he said, I think he's not going to be happy about how he handled it. You know, this is a situation where if you have to talk it through with Broxa, you know, I think that's something that is going to be much more effective to actually fixing the results. But at the end of the day, I think if Fnatic had won a game or two earlier in the groups before this happened, I don't think you see that kind of a blow up, because to me, this was like, yes, mathematically it's not a must-win game, but no one has ever made it out from 0-3. To me, this was a must-win game, right? And when you lose that, it's like, well, Worlds is over, couldn't even do anything, you know, got lane swapped on 2 games. This game I'm in a counter matchup, didn't get any help. Like, that sucks.
I mean, the issue I have with Fnatic is, like, looking at it from the European side, when they went to Rift Rivals, they kind of got exposed, as it were. They had this very linear playstyle, which North American teams did a really good job of shutting down. And now it feels like that they've come into Worlds with another similar playstyle, which is like, hey, we're going to play a lot through bot lane. I mean, even in their Immortal games, they literally left Soaz and they sent 4 people bot, I think at like level 4, right? With a Rise and stuff. So I think it's something that teams have identified, and now they're just changing their focus away from caps, and they're just tunneling onto Soaz because they think that his mental stability isn't that strong. They think if they just focus him, they can shut him down. And it feels like that also Fnatic are not willing to play through him, which I find fascinating, because one of the things that Reckless said towards the very end of the regular season was, I trust my team more to carry. I don't feel that I need to be making all these plays like on Kennen and on Twitch,
right, because
I can trust the rest of my team more. And it just feels like they've regressed from that after they lost in the semifinals to Misfits. But also I feel like this World should also give an indication of why Misfits was deserved of that second spot from Europe.
To be fair, Soaz even himself has said, like, he's more of a smart player than a mechanical player, and so I'm talking about that on Twitter. And I don't think you can always play through him that much if he's just going to be on tanks, right? Like, if you're going to be like a con style player or flamer or haunter or whoever, and you're going to be playing more carry oriented stuff, then you can do that. But it's hard to play through him if all he's going to play is Maokai, and whether that's the team choice or his choice or whatever, that's another story.
Fair, but like during the regular season, he had great Gnar games, he had great Camille games. Like,
but if they're not going to pick it, you can't play through him. And I'm not blaming him. Right? Yeah, I'm just saying, like, as a team choice, right? I think that's something that has to be taken into consideration,
especially right now considering the meta. I mean, bottom lane is what you want to play through. Or you can play through mid in the early game and use mid to transition your team
to
later. It's a bot lane, right? You know, early on in the game, of course, bottom lane is all about mining as much gold as you possibly can for your support.
I like that.
Relic shields, gold, quints, and stuff like that. But so it seems to me like My optimal way to play in the meta right now would be to play through mid lane early for jungle control, for vision, while bottom lane just kind of farms up, and then you transition down there. And it does suck for top laners right now. That I feel like is the best way to go, because top lane gets stuck with a tank or something like that. But I honestly just feel like that is the one with the highest probability of success. Then that opens the door for these, Nasus picks and stuff, though. And I like that's why we like that we have Longzhu and teams like that to correct for what is the majority of the teams are going to do.
Yeah, because we have Fnatic down there at 0-3, which they still had a very close game against Immortals and then a very volatile game against Gigabyte Marine. So if they're not completely boom mentally, I can see a world in which they actually could pick up 2 wins in that group.
And I think that's the biggest factor. Is how can Fnatic regroup after this, because they're playing Longzhu early on in week 2, and if you
it's another 22-minute game, right?
Yeah, I was talking to Fisher, and
it's on the same day.
He's like, okay, if Longzhu's the last one that you have, and then you have the whole
confidence.
day, exactly, you have the whole day to all right, we beat Gam, all right, we beat Immortals, now we have this chance. If we beat Longzhu, we can force this tiebreaker. But if you lose the Longzhu super early on in the day, then does that just crush the morale?
The only bright side is that Soaz did tweet we're determined to get at least one satisfying win before we leave Worlds. So you can look at the bright side that from his perspective they're gonna try. But yeah, I think that the big difference between week 1 and week 2 is now you play your entire group, and then one bad game at the start of the day could affect your mentality for the rest of it. Because also thinking about other groups, Uzi is also a player that I've heard if you put him behind, he can struggle to recollect himself. So.
To be fair, he was behind in the G2 game and had an incredible game.
Exactly. Other teams in the group, Gigabyte Marines, they had the most exciting opening we've ever seen Worlds. They lane swapped. They looked amazing. They pulled Nocturne out at level 5. Since then, they've teleported into a turret at level 1 as Mordekaiser and died. And they have also done Heal Ignite, Lulu in standard lanes, and died a bunch.
They also had the most exciting first 3 minutes of the second game of Worlds. I was hyped up.
I was.
And then the game was over at 3:20 when Longzhu showed us that you can still turret dive 4v2 when they're both level 1 pretty easily and then take the turret.
Yeah, the best part of that game is they bring back the old lane swap wards, and you're like, oh, yes.
That's why people stopped doing it.
We should prepare against lane swap meta, even if it's extremely old, against this team that lane swapped literally the last time that we saw them at an international event. So preparation definitely is huge here, especially for Group B.
Yeah, I think that the Marines will still pull out a new thing, but
I hope so.
It's looking less and less reliable the more we get into it. It's not even just the fact that their strategies don't work. It's that their players are making so many mistakes. I didn't get to call it out in the cast, but the team fight where Lulu died by accident because Lulu moved into a realm warp as they were trying to pick Cody's son, and Cody's son's Rakan just pulled back his Featherstorm with Blade Caller and killed the Lulu that just appeared for a third of a second and then died. It was kind of hilarious, but just a lot of individual mistakes from their support, from Archie in the top lane, and that's the main reason that they're losing to me.
And the regression from game 1, some people called it cheese. There's been a lot of discussion about, should it be called that or not? I don't think it should, but everything that they did made a lot of sense as far as planning. It felt like it was very planned out. The power farming of this Nocturne, pushing everything into that. It felt like everything was well thought out. And then, not only just individual mistakes, but in the third game against Immortals, I don't know if after Longzhu, they're we were going to lane swap, but we can't because now Immortals will just do this to us. But the Heal Ignite Lulu made no sense at all to me, and I talked to this a little bit on the desk. I think it can work fine if you're playing a snowbally type lane. They're playing against Zyra Khan as Kog'Maw Lulu.
Yep.
That is a losing lane, and it's not a snowball lane. If they pick Draven or something, and then they're Heal Ignite Lulu, and it's an exhaust Draven or whatever, and you're just going to do this all-in crazy cheese, and you're going to try to smash them in lane, then that makes some sense. But when you're sitting under your turret and trying to farm out a lane with Heal Ignite, it made it so hilariously easy for Immortals to pick on this Lulu. I mean, Smithy and Pobelter are coming down nonstop, and they didn't even try to go for the Kog'Maw because they knew the Lulu was a guaranteed kill every time.
And Lulu's already one of the more vulnerable supports for the bottom lane.
Yep.
I was talking to a couple of the support players about differences between Janna and Lulu because it actually has been coming down to personal preferences, and that was another one of the weaknesses for her. So by taking the heal instead of Flash, you're just exacerbating her issue that already exists there. And as you said, it was an easy and very clear focus from the very beginning of the game.
I mean, during spring, it was Lulu Kama that were like the two premier supports. Then she had a slight nerf to her base health. And then coming into summer, everyone started picking Thresh because you just pick the Thresh into the Lulu and you insta-kill her at level 2 or level 3 because of how literally squishy she is,
right.
you know? So now because of Ardent Sensor, you can't do that as much anymore, but Rakan is the same sort of champion that can literally just all in you at level 2 and then that's a squishy yordle.
Even better.
Yeah.
Immortals had a pretty good showing as well. But what's interesting about this is like we can look at this 2-run record and say, yeah, Immortals, awesome. If Fnatic played better around their bottom lane lead in that game, Immortals would be 1-2, and we'd actually have like a 3-way tie down at the bottom of this group, and the conversation would be much different. But that's literally the line that decided this was Reckless getting a little overly ambitious at the end of that game, and Immortals winning it. Because other than that, they've been losing. You know, the Longzhu game, they technically had a lead. I thought their early game was good. I was
going to say, it was impressive early.
But there's been so many little mid-game hiccups that I hope you can attribute to nerves, but are pretty worrying going down.
That actually reminded me of a really good point here for Fnatic, because we've been pretty negative on Fnatic overall. But their game versus Immortals, especially the beginning of it, I actually thought they came in with a really good game plan. They saw the Jace top, and they're like, okay, they're 100% going to camp top. This Jace into Cho'Gath is one of the worst matchups that we have in the game. Longzhu did this already and won the game through Khan on the top. So they're like, okay, we're making a conscious choice to abandon that top lane, abandon Soaz on Cho'Gath, and play through the bottom lane, through Reckless. They absolutely snowballed out of control on the bottom side of the map. And early on watching this, you know, from NA perspective, I was like, oh crap, like we are actually screwed. That is such a good answer to, you know, someone trying to win through top lane is just snowball off bottom lane, because that's where the Ardent Sensor is, and you basically get 2 Fed members for the price of 1.
Yeah.
And you just have Cho'Gath build full tank and get all his free stats up there. However, it broke down in the late game for them, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, I also think it's smart because Jace traditionally has trouble contributing in team fights. You know, it's more of a you have to crush the side lane super hard. And although Flame was doing really well, if you just get to the point where you're stabilizing, you can like wave clear. Then the Jace starts to be kind of neutralized. Whereas a Twitch, to me, like is so much more powerful in the team fights. But I think what Immortals did very well is kind of like draw their battle lines, play defensive, sit back, allow themselves to farm up. And whether you want to say Fnatic did a poor job of finding fights or Immortals did a good job of avoiding them, or a combination of both, to me that you know, the famous kind of engage that Reckless had where he's flashing forward came from frustration, came from a lack of being able to find fights. Because you know, watching that game, it felt like it was about 20 minutes of Reckless in camouflage. He's stealthing around. He's looking for an opening.
For the fight.
It's not there. Immortals back off. He looks again. It's not there. They back off. He finally sees who he thinks is a solo pole belter. And, you know, eyes kind of go big. This is the hero moment. I can win the game. And to me, that just kind of spoke of impatience or getting frustrated from not being able to find openings.
But there was one moment in that game where I felt like you can either praise Fnatic. I mean, it's definitely worth praising Immortals just because of how well Flame played it. But I think 2 members went bot.
Oh,
it was Soaz
that was really
and
big.
Broxer.
Yeah.
And they both tried to kill him, and Immortals immediately went to Baron. That's how you play split push, right? Like, split pusher draws pressure, you have a numbers advantage, you force an objective on the other side of the map. They immediately go to Baron. Flame gets that kill onto
And
the
survives.
jungler and survives. And you're like, this is where
And then
Fnatic are now going to
Cho'Gath
crumble.
doesn't get the feast.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, literally that one decision from Fnatic was just perfectly capitalized on by Immortals. And I think, like, there were a number of things in that game that allowed Immortals to come back, and I think they just did a great job of punishing
And the thing is about that, it was the decision that was great, and then also it had these mechanical mistakes that let Immortals also be able to pull it off, right? You're talking about, you know, bumping back the Cho'Gath so he's not able to get the feast off, and they teleport out Rise at the same time as like Flame is cornered between the turrets, and Flame just shoots his way out of that long lane, and he even survives while getting the kill onto Broxa with the last like 50 HP or whatever he had left. Was just such an epic moment.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. That epic moment is the difference between a 3-way tie for second in this group.
Yep.
Which means there's still like Immortals is going to be real happy to have that win, because it basically means that if they beat the Marines and Fnatic lose to Longzhu, like, congrats, they're through. But without that moment, we're having a much different conversation right now.
And that's how tight a lot of the groups are, right? That's Worlds. It's very, very competitive. And in a lot of these groups, there is, okay, well, Longshu, everyone's like, yep, okay, they're getting out of the group. Good job, Longshu. But there's only one other spot between 3 teams, and you have one super volatile team with Gigabyte, and then you had 2 fairly comparable teams with Immortals and Fnatic.
And we're going to touch on Longzhu real quickly, but we're going to have a lot of time to talk about Longzhu throughout Worlds because these guys are going places. There was a worry in the back of my mind that they had too many rookies or that they didn't necessarily play the meta and they were going to struggle a bit in group stage. Not even close. Like, they have dominated
Best team for
harder
me.
than anyone else in this group stage. So congrats. They're going to go 6-0.
I found it just a little funny that in their first game at Worlds, everyone was praising them for their bot lane's ability to tank ganks, and you know how
then they
it's
died
super
4
easy.
times.
Yeah, and then they
Yeah.
died 4 times in a row, right? And I'm like,
Immortals,
okay,
baby.
Yeah, this clearly isn't. This isn't indicative of the skill of the team, and they did a great job of coming back. I think they got a bit of a lucky Baron. I think it was a great call,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it was just that very, very small window that they had to take advantage of in the moment. But yeah, after that first game, talking to Papa Smithy, it feels like that Gorilla was also a little nervous too. So it was great to see that they very quickly bounced back, and I think that they're well on their way to going 6-0.
Sweet. Do we think there's going to be any differences in this group, or is it standings going to stay the same? Longzhu, Immortals, Gigabyte Marines, Fnatic.
I mean, I think 3 and 4 could swap around,
Yeah.
but those were the teams that I thought would probably end up
Yeah.
at the bottom anyway. And I don't see this epic comeback from Fnatic happening when it's never happened before and their kind of mental boom. I would be excited to see if anyone could take a game off Longzhu, though.
What's Immortals' game order, Vedius? I know you have the schedule up there
for
because
Immortals, they start the day with Gigabyte Marines.
That's
Then
it.
they have,
that's it for them. I think if
then
they
have a
win
2-game
that, they're
gap,
in.
And then Immortals have Fnatic they go up against. That's their second game.
Okay.
Yeah. And I don't see another way for the Gigabyte Marines to really surprise people now that everyone is going to level 1 invade them for deep wards. If you level 1 invade this team and get the deep wards down and you see, exactly what their early game plan is, I think, no matter what they do in draft phase, it makes it so much more difficult to pull it off.
The thing about the Gigabyte Marines is it surprised me that they don't look to play more standard, because when they played against TSM and MSI, they went to all 5 games for the most part, I believe, just playing standard.
Yeah,
They did lane swap a lot, though,
So
didn't they?
it's
That was
standard.
at the actual event though. Like during that best of 5, they just played standard games. And
Yeah. Here's how I see Marines play. And I know we're spending a lot of time on this group, but there's a lot of conversation in this group. Like, the Marines play differently than you expect, and there's more ways to play non-standard than just lane swapping versus not lane swapping. Because I feel like what they did a lot of at MSI was, like, normally your timings for bot dives is when your mid laner hits level 6. Marines would do it at level 5, and it would be 45 seconds before when you would expect it. So they do a lot of that type of adaptation, and lane swapping is just kind of one of those things. So I agree with you, like, tunneling too hard on lane swaps is something I don't want to see. I want to see more of those things where they have an expected play and they go before it, or they do something completely different.
Yeah, timing-based plays I think would be really interesting, but we can probably move on to Group C here.
Sick.
Group C, obviously the big talk of the town, I think, is RNG. They played it exceptionally well. To me, the kind of shockers, if you will, are how Samsung underperformed versus, RNG overperforming, or whatever you want to actually call that. But this is a group where Korea did look very vulnerable. They almost lost to 1907 Fenerbahce. They got slammed by RNG. Everyone knew that this was going to be a very hard group coming in. And, G2 is kind of sitting on the outside now going into week 2.
As a European fan, it was heartbreaking when you see G2 start that Baron and you're like, that Twitch is going to murder all of you. And you could understand the logic, right? Because they did it before where they took the Baron, they Rise ult out it, they used the Rise ult to get out of the pit, and then they walked away after losing their mid inhib, right? And you're thinking, oh, this is really good. Maybe the strat will work twice. But RNG, they saw the strat once, they were super prepared for it, and they punished G2 extremely.
You know what I find interesting about that Baron play? The first time they did it, it was 35 health from being stolen.
Really?
MLXG smote at
Trick didn't even use
1,035 for 1,000, and then G2 got it with like an auto attack before the
Holy
realm warp took
moly.
it.
Yeah, Rise got it.
It
and
was
Trick didn't even
Rise.
use
Yeah,
Smite.
yeah.
Yeah, so like, yeah, it was a nice idea for play, but that was a 50-50 right there. And then they had it at like 7,000 when MLXG went in the next
Yeah.
time. It was like, screw this 50-50 garbage. We're going to fight him with Twitch. So I like the way they adapted to it at least.
Yeah, you also have to give credit to RNG for kind of forcing the situation, you know, because it's one of those situations where it's not an ideal Baron very clearly, and you're like, well, why are they taking it? It's because RNG has control of side waves. It's because RNG is kind of cutting off their options, and they know, you know, their inhibitor, I believe, was already down at that point. So it's like, generally speaking, when the base is cracked and you give up a Baron, the game is probably over.
Yeah, and I do think that, everybody thinks that Samsung is the most vulnerable Korean team, obviously, because they did actually drop a game, but also they didn't drop the game versus Fenerbahce, but they were very close and very worried about dropping that game and making more mistakes there. So this is definitely, you know, while originally when we saw the group draws, we were talking about Group D because there is no Korean team, but this is almost even more exciting that we have one of the Korean teams, you know, getting very close to dropping games and then actually doing it. That always makes for a lot of entertaining, you know, matchups in this one.
Yeah, essentially the Fnatic Immortals game in this group was the same as the Samsung Fenerbahce game, where like one thing goes differently and you have a three-way tie for second/last place. It is worrying for Samsung. In my heart, I feel like they will bounce back since they did make it to the World Finals and they are just a Korean team, and I've seen it enough times that that's going to happen. And also, I feel like the test for Haru failed. I thought after they got shut out by RNG, they were thinking, okay, Haru plays Ezreal. Maybe we'll get a little bit more early game tempo. Maybe that's what we need because they've been playing so slow. I think the answer is emphatically no because of how bad they looked in the mid and late game with Haru instead of Ambition, much like was the case whenever they subbed him in during the regular season or playoffs. So I think we see Ambition from here on out. And I agree, Samsung did look really shaky.
And I would say, while, you know, there's a lot of talk about that because of the shot calling, right? Like, I didn't even think that Haru played bad individually. I actually was pretty disappointed with, you know, the performance of the snowball trundle, and whether you want to say it's okay, vision, they should have had more vision, so Cuvée could have pushed more aggressively, or Cuvée should have just kind of been more aggressive to actually be going on the turrets. But Cuvée got snowballed so ridiculously hard in an advantageous matchup, and then basically just pushed mini waves to the turrets and farmed the jungle. And he did this for like 20 minutes with an insane advantage. He was thousands of gold up in a split push style build in an advantageous matchup. To me, I was very disappointed that he didn't play it more aggressively and actually just, like, when you're against a Cho'Gath like that and you're that ahead, you literally ignore him, you just pillar him away, and you start hitting the turret. And that's all you have to do.
I really like this game because it gave us proof why people emphasize that aspect of Ambition's game so much, his leadership and his seniority. We could see such stark differences that it really does kind of back up all those points.
Yeah, I think just getting excited, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, they could take a game. They're going to upset the group.
They didn't, so their hope is lost, I think. I think it's still a group.
All right, kill that excitement now. No fun for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, that was the one they were supposed to do because it is still going to be about RNG, Samsung, and G2. And how do we see it shaking
spoilers,
out?
right?
I would also say that story kind of happens a lot with Ezreal games. Like, you come out, you get your first blood after your like guaranteed level 2 gank, and then it kind of peters out there.
They got like 3 kills top 2 in the first few minutes. Like, he goes immediately up top. They kill the Cho'Gath. Cho'Gath TP's back, gets killed again. Then Cho'Gath walks his ass back to lane like 2 minutes later,
dies again.
and then they dive him again. So while I do agree, I think that it's like less on the Ezreal, because the Ezreal's supposed to fall off, and it's more on the people. It's like, all right, I snowballed you, Crown. All right, I snowballed you, Cuvée. Now what are you gonna do for me? Crown starts.
Then they're all like, you're supposed to tell me. Where's Ambition to tell me what to do?
Because Crown got bopped, and that was kind of how 1907 was able to come back.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about RNG. We talked a little bit about G2. Vedius, what are your thoughts on the 1-2 start? Because as weak as we say Samsung looked, they went 2-1, and by far their most decisive game was against G2.
That was pretty much like... It was funny because of how well it fit the narrative that was set up for it, right? Which is like Samsung is basically the older brother of G2 because they both play exactly the same styles. They're both going to pick exactly the same comps or comps to try to do the same thing. And then Samsung just do it better, which is pretty much what we saw. We saw G2, along with Fnatic, actually try the strat of banning out uncensored supports because they like having Mythion and Engage. They think he's super reliable on it. And I think that looking at their RNG game, it was actually a really good indicator of how much the team actually struggles when they don't have that same level of Engage. The fact that I believe in their G2 RNG it was Rek'Sai, Gnar, Lulu, right? So they actually have no reliable way to start a lot of fights. And you just see how much the team struggles without Mithy, who is one of their core shot callers, not being able to actually dictate the pace of fights and stuff.
Yeah. What I found interesting in the first matchup we saw of G2 when they played Samsung is we set up the story that they were going to be that late game team, but then they played Alistair Ivern, which was actually, I think, a much more early game to mid game strategy, and got taken to late and then smashed. But I think that underwritten assumption that Samsung will play the late game better than G2 will be challenged in the next round because we've seen them struggle against Fenerbahce, and we've seen them lose late game to RNG, and we've seen G2 play RNG relatively even in the mid to late game. So if G2, like if you want to be hopeful, wants to bounce back, like maybe that assumption is just wrong. Maybe they just beat Samsung in the late game.
The biggest thing, like one of the big discussions to Fisher and I have been having a lot is like they're just not fast enough. G2 is too much about getting the 80 to 90% play that goes in their favor. And whenever they evaluate and they're like, how risky is this play? If it's not above 70% success, they just don't take it. And I think that's such a big issue in this group because these teams are at a level with which they're willing to take those 50-50 plays. They're willing to like take the risk and take the gamble because they have such strong individuals. And I think that's right now what's separating G2 from the other two teams.
Yeah, I think if G2 draft, the super stand is super meta, I think they actually have a pretty good chance. Sven played so well against Uzi in their RNG matchup early on in the lane phase. Yeah. Sven and Mithy actually played so well, and it wasn't until those later stages where he actually got picked off with the surprise in mid that it actually started turning on them. But to me, their early game was actually really strong.
Yeah, and speaking of this group in like a who will get out way, everyone is really confident about RNG's 3-0 now. They're like we're getting questions. Is there a realistic chance that RNG can
win Worlds,
challenge all the Korean teams? There's no way I'm willing to make that call right now. Like they, to me, didn't have reliable enough victories, especially with how, like, yes, they played super, super well against G2 dealing with the Trist power spike, but I also think G2 didn't necessarily take enough advantages on. And I've seen RNG do amazing in a group stage before. It was MSI 2016. They went 8-2, I believe, in the 10-game group stage, and then got smashed by SKT once they got into the bracket stage. This group I can see potentially shifting a lot as we go forward because as great as RNG was, like, they got reverse swept in the LPL finals. Like, this team can just do a 180 with one moment.
The big thing, I think, is now how much do teams grow in the short space of time they have? Because last year at Worlds, G2 didn't. We thought that maybe after the week they would get better in the second week, and unfortunately for them, they couldn't. Whereas Korean teams always have the tendency of sometimes they look shaky in the first week.
They almost always get better.
Yeah, they almost always improve. They show way more respect to their opponents. They seem to have figured everything out. And I think that Samsung, like, if you get a surprise win against them in week 1, that's the best time to get it because I think it becomes that much harder in week 2.
And that's why I think it's such a hard group now for G2 because even though they do at least have the one win, even if you say, okay, you beat RNG and you beat 1907 Fenerbahce in week 2, great, you have 3 wins, but that's then expecting RNG to get no wins. That's expecting Samsung to not pick up a couple wins. So they pretty much are painted into a corner where either Samsung randomly lose all their games or RNG randomly lose all their games, or they have to go 3-0 and then pray. It's like their fate is kind of not really fully in their hands anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing Europe can do right now is just pray that DeFiscio is not casting the games, because if he is, that's going to spell inevitable doom for EU.
Yeah. Prediction, I think Samsung will 5-1, RNG will 5-1, and I think we're going to get a tiebreaker for first.
That would be pretty big because first seed is so important to not get potential another Korean team, right?
Yeah.
Samsung and RNG do definitely not want to see, great, you're having an awesome tournament, SKT in the quarterfinals. Longju in the quarterfinals. All right, have
would be a good quarterfinal, though.
Which team is Samsung dropping their game to in your prediction?
So they've already dropped the game. So they're going to 3-0 week 2, I think. I think they're going to bounce back. The final game of that day is Samsung versus RNG. That would require that G2 doesn't have an upset game against either RNG or Samsung, and that they take down Fenerbahce, which I think both those teams will do easily. Sure. I just see them being the more consistent force in Samsung. Like they played too slow. They almost overcorrected. Like you can tell there's a little bit going on there where they're definitely not settled and they absolutely are vulnerable. but I've seen them bounce back enough times at this point that I think they're going to do it. I think they have a stronger infrastructure, so to speak, to get that done.
I want to believe.
I know that's a bad word. They have more experience. Like Ambition has been at so many world championships, and the Samsung org, even just thinking back to last year when they played with the same roster, also had kind of that shaky week 1 where they lost to TSM in like 22 minutes, and then they just smashed the rest of the group stage.
I mean, I want to believe in RNG just for the simple reason that, you know, I don't think it was just Haru. I don't think it was any one thing. I think that there was a lot of poor individual performances and decisions from Samsung. So to me, it seemed like there were some problems. You know, even Cuvée, who gets so much credit in their loss against RNG, was just randomly getting caught out all the time.
Yeah.
I was disappointed with how he played from a lead in their win over 1907 as well. Like Crown, there's a lot of talk about how he was pretty poor in summer. So I think that there are some holes in this team, and I want to believe that RNG is going to keep this up and give us, you know, a genuine threat from a non-LCK region.
That's why I thought that game was so impressive, where RNG's strategy in the early game, you know, swapping on the BF sword with a Tristana to push down turrets and get this early lead was so impressive. Now I would like to see just the last thing that would make me fully on board with this RNG, to the top ship would be seeing them go late game with Samsung or go late game fairly even with teams like G2 and stuff,
right.
and having that strategy post 30 minutes when Baron and Elder Dragon are both involved and you have more things on the map to think about when you're making these choices of, do I shove my top wave fast or do I let it slow build? What are you actually trying to build that pressure around?
Vedius, is G2 going to make it out of group, or is it an RNG Samsung fight for first?
It's almost certainly going to be RNG Samsung.
You're so sad
just-
saying that.
Whenever we talk to European casters, they're just like so dead inside. It's like,
yeah, because like the
Just
thing
wait
is,
until we can talk about
you
Misfits.
just-
and
yeah,
EVP.
just- You just got to get used to being NA. We've had 3 years in a row with a 6-3 record in week 1,
Yeah.
and cumulatively had one of those teams make
Well,
it out.
this was TSM's group last year, right?
Yeah,
and they started
it's
2-1
true.
and they
Yeah.
still didn't make it out. It's a damn hard group, and we knew that going
but
in.
It's just unfortunate for G2 because I feel like they've grown a lot this year. Like I'm sure TSM have a very similar narrative of like, we're not just going to dominate our region in terms of the early game, we're going to understand better how to play the whole game. And even though I feel like they demonstrated more of what they could do at MSI, their group stages were still rough, but it's one of those things where we really want to see G2 in a best of 5 against someone that is an SKT, right? We just
Longju
that'd be fine. Like I'm fine with G2
okay.
versus Longju, right? But I just in a best of 5. That's what we want to see them, right? Like that's what I as a European fan really want to see. Just like because there's so many, it's one of the big excuses we have for them.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
They're a best of 5
yeah,
team.
that's an
Oh,
excuse.
yeah.
I was gonna say
Right?
I want to see it so that we
It
can
be
finally put an end to
disproven, right?
that. Yeah.
Exactly, right? That's all I want. So it would be great if they could get out of groups, but they're gonna. The only thing that I could possibly think of is that to me, RNG have not come across as like so superior to the other teams in their group. Like they fell to an early lead against Fenerbahce, they fell to an early lead against G2, and it was super slow and pretty even against them and Samsung. And arguably a lot of analysts said that even Samsung, like they didn't play that great. So the only thing is, if RNG come into week 2 still feeling confident, still feeling good, and they don't actually improve at all, that could be a point that G2 could suddenly swing over, but it's unlikely.
Sweet. Group D is the one that's going to be on Saturday. That is the most dynamic group I think we
Easiest
have
group
at the
for
World
EU.
Championship. TSM 2-1, Misfits 2-1, Team WE 2-1, and the Flash Wolves 0-3. That's what's required for 3 teams to be 2-1.
That to me is the funniest part of this group, because coming in, all of our prep and talking to all the LMS analysts, they're like, yeah, you should have low expectations for the LMS teams. This was not the greatest split for us, and especially with Hong Kong Attitude getting knocked out in the playing stages. Everyone was even lower, and then we all flew over here to China and started talking to people about the boot camp, and all
Flash
the
Wolves
players
looks really good.
All the players from the boot camp were like, oh man, our group's so much harder now for TSM. The Flash Wolves are actually looking really good. And then you talk to the other side and they're like, oh yeah, Flash Wolves did really well in the boot camp. So
and
then
we start thinking about it, it's like, oh man, they probably just don't care that much about the LMS because it's so easy for them. Maybe they're actually just really good. Now they're 0-3. Like LMS's only win has been against another 0-3 team in EDG.
To be fair,
Hong Kong Attitude got 3-0 by
beat,
Fnatic in the play-in bracket stage.
To be fair, they almost beat TSM at the start,
Yeah.
and this is kind of another one of those situations where you're kind of left with some what ifs, right? Similar to Fnatic. Ooh, what if Fnatic win that game against Immortals? Maybe they don't.
The problem,
maybe they don't
the problem with
explode,
keep
right?
on bringing up that storyline is that that's what happens when we have
It
best of
happens to
one group
everyone.
stages.
Yeah. Well, it happens to everyone. It happens to 2-1 teams as well, right? You know, what if TSM plays more respectfully in their early game against Misfits and so on and so forth, right? There's always going to be those, but at the end of the day, they are 0-3, and they, to me. Like, I actually had a fair bit of hope for them after the TSM game, not just because they barely lost, but because I actually thought that they looked like pretty good in that game.
They did.
I lost all hope for them after their last game. I was actually like really just not enjoying watching them against WE because I felt like everything looked bad. It's like their macro play is not looking very good. Their lanes are not looking very impressive. Their team fight coordination nonstop throughout that game. It's like half the people are going in, half the people are running away.
Hey, Maple's decent.
Maple had good macro movement. He was moving around taking towers. That's about all you can say. I mean, there was so many times in that where it's like Maple was diving in on Vladimir and Betty's like ulting away on Tristana, ulting away the 80 carry.
That was a turret game, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a turret game where
yeah.
you know, and they're dropping Tarek ults with no one even within 1,000 units of them. Like
It was C Rumble alt, press R.
yeah.
Even though there was nothing to keep you in the Rumble alt and you can walk out of it.
And they had engage. To me, that's how you better use Tarek Ultimate, right? You have hard engage, you run forward with your hard engage, then you press the Tarek Ultimate, then you're fighting, and it's good. And just everything was off the rails, it felt like, for Flash Wolves.
There's a chance there's a little bit of tilt going into that last game because they didn't expect to be 0-2 and like they just hadn't quite clicked for them. One thing I do want to touch back on is like, isn't this the 4th year in a row Flash Wolves has been at Worlds, or it's at least 3?
It's their third year.
Third year. Okay, so they missed. They made group stage. They made it out of the 2015 group stage.
That was the year of Origin.
But then last year they'd lost to
last.
IMA and
2-4.
Cloud9 and went 2-4, which was kind of last in that group. And then this year they're 0-3. So at least we can start to kind of put to bed they're always underestimated coming into these things and then always overperform until next week. Because those games were close, right? Those games were close. And that's the most interesting thing about this group to me is this is not 1907 Fenerbahce sitting at 0-3 with 3 ties at 2-1. Every game that the 2-1 teams play against Flash Wolves are going to be a threat to drop the game, especially now that we're moving into this 3 games on 1 day format. How are you going to index your prep against all these different teams? Where are your main strategy is going to be? You're not going to probably make your main strategy against Flash Wolves, and that's when I think they have a chance to get you. And they're only 2 games out of first, technically speaking, because no one is 3-0. So if there is ever a chance for an 0-3 team to make it out of groups, which has never happened after you go week 1 in the first week to making it out in week 2, this would technically be the team that has a chance to do that.
I think EDG as well, sitting at 0-3, might be a team that has a chance to do that. But we can debate that when we get to the next group.
We'll touch on that. Okay, what do we think about the teams at 2-1 though? Who's the most likely to emerge as the
Misfits! Yeah!
Tell me why, boy.
most likely? Go.
Most likely. Most likely, probably not.
You can't even be excited about this team.
I can be excited, but I have to be honest first and say that I had no faith in Misfits coming into Worlds simply because
Gotta have some faith after the TSM game.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that what we had the opportunity to see was that these young players adapt really quickly. And after their crushing defeat against WE, they very quickly identified their issues. They got better used to the stage. They wiped off the nerves. And then in their game versus Flash Wolves, it was long and it was drawn out. But they seemed to be playing a much more controlled and much more sensitive. Exactly. They just played much better.
Classic Trundle.
And then against their TSM game, they had I felt like they played the best out of all 3 games. So it just shows that this team gets better very quickly, and you just have to give a lot of credit to the behind-the-scenes coaching staff that they do have. Like, they've got a lot of support in terms of, like, they have not a psychologist, but like that kind of assistance. They have a really good coach in Hussein. Like, their support staff for a very young team is very good because it just helps them, okay, where are the issues? What have we got to do? And because they're all young players, they don't have these egos. They don't have this set in stone, I have to play this way. They're all very quick to adapt, and they all really just want to get better as a team.
I definitely agree. I thought they showed a lot of positives in their game versus TSM. good draft starting out. Yes, I have some gripes with TSM and some of the things they left open early on and giving over Zaya like second rotation and stuff like that. But they capitalized on that so well. And then it wasn't just one of these games where you're like, okay, there's some stuff goes crazy in the early game, and then like the underdog or whatever gets this lead and uses that lead to snowball. They actually did so well in controlling side waves to pressure TSM later. There were multiple points where TSM were funneled into like one decision. And their options were almost completely cut off because Misfits had already prepped both side waves. They were pressuring on the Baron. And so TSM, multiple points, they're like sitting around mid and they're like, our only option is to go force a fight right now because Misfits set up so many moving parts.
And I also think that in those fights, PoE to me, yes, I think that the Zaya was a standout. Hansama did a lot of damage, all this. But to me, a lot of it did hinge on the fact that PoE was able to so effectively pressure Doublelift in the team fights. And I was actually watching this game, despite the fact that the early game, bot lane was tragic for TSM. They had essentially scaled up. They had gotten to the point where I'm like, okay, this is probably too hard to execute in a team fight for PoE, right? I just think that LeBlanc is very tough to pull off in team fights against, someone like a Syndra and against this sort of comp where you jump forward, you get blown up, you get CC'd, whatever. But he was able to pull it off so incredibly well, and I thought that enabled the Zaya to play very aggressively. But I definitely do have a few bones to pick, I think, with A, the comp from TSM, and B, how they actually managed the early game. Because straight from the level 1, when I see them zoning in the game, I see the call picked up from Doublelift, I see Fervor on the Kog'Maw.
Yep.
To me, both of those is like, you're so disrespectful kind of to your opponents there. When you're playing against a Gragas, you're, to me, the lane that's going to be pressured. You're not with a Lulu or a Janna, like someone who has as much peel for you. So
of course, that was the Nami game.
Well,
right?
hold on though.
Yeah.
I have to say that is actually very strong. Nami actually is really good in the lane phase.
yeah, Nami is good lane phase,
problem,
but it's not defensive. Like it's not someone who could peel a Gragas off you if you get ganked.
I think that the mistake was in how they played it out afterwards. I actually think Kog'Maw with Call with the Nami in your lane there is fine, but the start from Doublelift, he went by himself without Biofrost to go harass them on red, and he got chunked to like 25% or something to
He
start
healed
that
back
lane.
up to full after that, before he died, though.
It took no, he did not.
Yes, he did.
No, he did not. It took like 3 minutes or something. He was constantly trying to heal
Wasn't
back up.
both AD carries super low for the vast majority of
Exactly.
that laning
He did
phase?
not heal back up to full.
Yeah, we'd have to watch it again. What I remember is when he got back to lane, Biofrost actually used most of his heals to harass.
Yeah, he
Yes.
did.
Right?
But
So double was pretty low the whole time.
He had to blow his potion super early on, and he still wasn't back at full.
to me, well,
That's why he got harassed down
we
so
could go back
easily.
and check later, but
Check the tapes.
either way, like I think that so I don't have as much problem with Cull. Like I think that if you're going something like Warlords, like that helps you so much through the laning phase. And to me, when you're in a lane, when you're on a champion that needs to scale, like going more defensively in lane is okay because it's more about surviving, and that's also the vulnerability like of this lane to me. Like Nami is a good laning 2v2, but is vulnerable to ganks. They are vulnerable to roams. PoE even talked in the post game interview how you're supposed to play this mid lane matchup is okay. Well, Syndra's supposed to win the lane, but I'm supposed to go kill a side lane, right?
Yeah.
And you have Gragas and you have a roaming LeBlanc, and you're starting Cole and Fervor instead of like, if this is a D-Shield Warlords Kog'Maw, I feel like it's so much easier to stay at high health. It's so much easier to kind of survive this lane and absorb that pressure. And to me, that was kind of just like, I felt like a bit of a disrespectful choice.
You know what also makes it easier to stay at full health? Not getting chunked to 20% at level 1.
But my question is, now if let's say TSM play a different bot lane, right? Let's say they show a little bit more respect towards Hans Summer and Ignar.
I don't even have a problem with the bot lane. I just have a
Yeah,
problem with
but,
setup.
But let's just say, like, do we still think the Misfits would have been able to win? Because like, I think everyone can agree that Doublelift and Bio did disrespect Hanzo and Ignar. And like, as you already said, the way they played that lane was very disrespectful, and they could have played it in other ways. But then Misfits, they slowed down. They were 4-0, and then the game was neutralized by TSM. They got 2 Barons, and they got... they may not have gotten the Elder Drake later, but they managed to equalize the game like they have done in every game so far at groups. And I'm just wondering, like, do we think TSM now has a big weakness in their early game, or is there like are they just getting lucky? Are they just finding those clutch moments to win games?
I don't think that was like necessarily you can say a big weakness. I think that the bot lane, whatever it was, whether it was level 1 trade, whether it's itemization, whether it's combination, it's probably a number of things. Nami using heals offensively, it's everything, right? With how poorly that bot lane went, if the bot lane didn't go poorly, I think TSM wins that game pretty easily for the simple fact that Haunter was smashing top lane and Syndra has a big CS advantage mid lane. Like, pressure is heavily in TSM's favor in top and mid. I think that the way that Misfits was able to actually like stay in the game and be able to be successful was through abusing bot, right? And I think that like in a game where they're able to better absorb the pressure and stay more around even, I think that becomes an extremely hard game for Misfits when LeBlanc has to go back to mid lane, 40 CS down, Shen's down 40 CS and has lost his turret.
One thing I will say is while TSM has had those bad starts in all 3 games where they've opened 0 kills to 4 against Flash Wolves, 0 kills to 3 against Team WE, 0 kills to 4 against Misfits, is in the games they won, when they equalized the gold, they equalized it on the carries. In this game, the gold was equalized thanks to a difference between a Renekton and a Shen, which isn't nearly as valuable when they're starting to play the macro game. So if TSM is going to continue to play this like hyper passive early game where they're just playing defense because they think they can like, I don't know, be like SKT and win the late game decision making, they have to have better carry protection. Like, it needs to be Haunter who's out on an island, or even Bjergsen would be fine as long as their AD carry in the late game is in a good place, because Doublelift, I mean, he also played really badly. I think we checked, he used Flash once in 46 minutes.
Oh yeah.
The entire game.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of situations where he was dead to rights and shouldn't have flashed anyway, but there were a few moments where the flash definitely would have helped.
And I know we're talking a lot about this game because I think it was a very, very interesting one, especially with low expectations for
Misfits.
Misfits.
It's the game that makes the group diverse.
Exactly.
Because without this game, it's another 3-0, 2-1, 1-2.
Yeah. So I want to ask you guys also about what you guys thought about Doublelift's build, because to me, his build was pretty standard. It makes a lot of sense with a John or Lulu, but Nami in teamfight stage, everything's over with lane, whatever. He's got a lot of items. You're not actually having anywhere near the same level of protection, especially when you have, a number of champions that are diving, like the Renekton and these people who are going forward. Syndra's not really going to be protecting you. You don't have a John or Lulu. So I actually felt like this was a game for like tank Kog'Maw, where you're going like Frozen Mallet and Ma, and you're going like very defensively because you don't have that sort of peel. And that was more what I was expecting out of this team comp for the team fight style, because we saw how quickly he was popped in a lot of these team fights, and you don't have anywhere near that level of protection, so you have to be self-sustaining. Like, I feel if this is a game where you just go Rage Blade, Frozen Mallet, Ma, like Mercurial, etc., you go very, very defensive. That makes so much more sense to me in this style of game, because he didn't have to maximize DPS to kill LeBlanc, right? He just has to not die at the very start and then add some form of damage, and his solo laners, I felt like, could carry.
I'm mostly sure Misfits first picked Janna, right? In this game.
I don't remember drafting.
Yeah, they did. They did.
Yeah,
it was
That's
Janna.
like, yes, I think a more self-protecting Kog'Maw would have been better. Xayah would have been the best.
Yeah.
Like, without having the actual super protectors for Kog'Maw, I think that pick loses a lot of value. And I know we have these other points, like there's a different way they could have played the lane phase, and maybe
There's
they
a
could have
million
actually
factors in any
won with
game.
Nami and Kog'Maw and then never fallen behind. But like, Xayah is super good, especially when
They also could have gone. Karma.
that's a self-peel support right
But
away.
they may have been just worried about giving up then Janna Cog, right? Because then you're giving over
for
that
sure,
very
for
strong
sure.
lane to your opponents. There's a lot going into it. At the end of the day, Misfits, I think, played incredibly well, and that has really shaken up the group. But we should probably talk a little bit about, WE, and even, like, we haven't really touched on them.
Well, even just who's going to get out of the group and whether or not WE is reliable, because like WE lost the game to TSM, but probably looked better than everyone else when closing out their other two
Yeah,
opponents.
they did. W is pretty scary when they get that early lead. I think a lot of it hinges on the success of Condi, but I think like this is also something that we discussed a lot at length coming into the tournament, which was like WE seems to not rely on early leads, but they come across as a very well-rounded team. They know they're specialized, or they're known within the LPL for being really good team fighters. Mystic in particular is considered one of, if not the best AD carry from the LPL analysts. And then when you actually watch them play, one of the big weaknesses they have is they ever fall behind. They're a team that also don't take risks. They're very patient. They wait. They look for an opportunity to punish. And I think that's a big part of why in the TSM game they fell behind so dramatically, because they No, but actually, that game they even got into the lead, right? And then
Yeah.
we neutralized, and then
They
it all
did.
just fell apart. So I don't know what's going on with WE.
Yeah, they've definitely
point.
they've definitely been a little bit inconsistent, and they've also been here longer than the other teams because they had to play in the play-in and technically got a lot of warming up. The big question to me is the difference between like Ben and Zero. It definitely feels like they want to play Ben. But he's had some really bad games, and they've been putting in Zero within that. Because if that bottom lane stabilizes, I feel like that fixes their bottom lane, fixes their team fighting because the team does play around Mystics. So I think that's one of the big inconsistencies they've been working with. But with that being said, WE is mostly playing to my expectations, and I think there's a really good chance. This may be an unpopular opinion, but based on TSM's really rough early game and looking too much like I don't want to make a mistake, MSI TSM, I have WE as the favorite in this group going into week 2.
I would have to say that a lot of the early game stuff too, especially if you're looking at across the table at WE with Condi, Svenskeren has consistently been caught out in the river in the early game, trying to get some wards, for his team, trying to get vision for the team. It's to be fair, it's often been against a team that has a Shen or something, and they're ready to teleport in on him, but he puts himself in a lot of these positions, and it hasn't seemed like TSM have been working very well together for early vision. And I think early vision might be the cause of a lot of this early game problems that you're bringing up, because they'll often give over a kill or something in the efforts to try and get that.
He's actually 0, 10, and 15, I believe, KDA throughout the first 3 games. So
1.5 KDA, not that bad, man.
there you go, above 1, looking great. I actually think though I have less faith in WE perhaps than you guys, because when I think about, so yes, TSM has had issues. Misfits has, I think, looked massively better in the most recent 2 games though than in their first game. To me, in their first game, it looked like a completely different team. I personally had chalked up a lot of that to nerves. It was all 5 of these players' first time at Worlds. Their first game on stage was against WE. They did not look competitive whatsoever. That's one win for WE. They got pretty badly beat, I thought, by TSM as far as like they had a lot of opportunities to win, and I didn't think that they were very impressive in that game. And then when I looked at the Flash Wolves game, this was the game that you were saying maybe even Flash Wolves was tilted, because I actually thought Flash Wolves was atrocious against WE. So when I look at the strength of their wins, it's hard for me to say, right? Because that's what makes this group so hard to predict and so interesting, because there's things to take away from every team, right? Flash Wolves had an awful first week, but we know that they have had big games in the past. We know they could take games off these teams. Misfits had an awful first game, but, strong 2 games, and TSM has had a bad early game. All the teams have had weaknesses.
So, predictions. I got WE, TSM, Misfits, Flash Wolves, but I would not be surprised if Flash Wolves finishes 2 and 4, which could make this group really strange.
Who would they get their wins from?
I don't know, right? Because all 3 of these teams, there are reasons, like you just outlined for Team WE, to not be confident.
Sure.
There's reason not to be confident for TSM. Same with Misfits, just because of their inexperience and how close the TSM game was. Very easy that they show up at 1 and 2. So
I suck
tough.
at predictions, chat.
just make one
So I would just make one.
and believe in it.
Okay, I'm going to believe in this.
Okay,
right?
what is it?
I believe the TSM will not make it out of this group,
Okay.
and I believe that it will be WE Misfits, TSM Flash Wolves.
How many games will Flash Wolves win?
1.
All right, there we
And
go.
a part of me
Bold that
thinks
you delivered
I actually
that in
think
a way
that
that you
could
believe
be.
it.
Yeah, but I actually think that could be that one upset will be against. I
Against
just think
TSM.
TSM is going to get
exactly.
that upset.
If
I just
TSM
think,
loses to Flash Wolves, that crushes their chances in this group,
I-
right?
I-
Because they lose that, they lose another one, they go 3 and 3, they might lose some tiebreaker somewhere, and then they're out.
I still have TSM first. I still think that I have faith that they're going to bounce back. I do think that they are a strong team. I think that if you can shape up a little bit in the early game, they've looked very good for the majority of the rest of the time. I actually think that Misfits was more impressive to me than WE in week 1. So I think it's going to be TSM, Misfits, WE.
just very quickly, how confident are you guys in TSM's ability to adapt from week to week? I didn't watch all of their regular season, so I don't know how much growth they've shown us for all space of time.
If we're talking about the North American LCS, I am supremely confident.
Right.
But something about this team and how they look towards the World Championship the whole year is this holy grail of when they must perform. The dynamic changes. It's a different team that I see on the international stage than I see domestically. So based on that, not Barry.
Yeah, TSM, you have this feeling like there's so much pressure on the players, and all of these different things come and kind of cloud their heads during the world stage. Whereas Misfits, I love the attitude that you see from all the Misfits players in any of their interviews. Max Lord's just like, "Yep, we're gonna win," and you're like, they all have this happy-go-lucky, nothing to lose, like bunch of rookies. We're just messing stuff up for everybody else now. Woo, this is fun. Like it does seem like they really won't at any point be the victims of some type of pressure like that. So I think that would definitely be a big advantage for them, as well as how good they actually did look in their game versus TSM as far as their later game strategy. However, all that pro Misfit stuff, and I think I'm still going to put them third. And my reasoning for putting TSM then WE both above them is kind of the same for both teams, where you're talking about your faith in TSM, Azael, to recover over the next few days and practice through and examine those issues that they had in week 1. I have that same faith, and I'm applying it to WE, even though I thought that was going to occur from play-ins to group stages, and there were definitely more problems that they showed in play-ins, and they did patch quite a bit of those up. Especially Mystic had some quite good games where I definitely had a question mark for him. So that is why I'm going to make mine TSM, then WE, then Misfits, and Flash Wolves, I believe, are going to win 0 games in week 2.
I love the diversity. Someone will be right.
Yeah,
because we've gotten every prediction.
just very quickly, the schedule is Misfits versus Flash Wolves first, followed by WE TSM.
That's a big game.
And then it's Flash Wolves WE. So
that's perfect. Like that's just perfect for resolving everything.
Misfits could take a very early lead in the group, or they could be upset. Right?
Yeah.
And then the final day of groups is going to actually be Group A. That is SKT, C9, EDG, and AHQ.
Yeah, and this one, I hazard to say it, is the most clean cut of the crew.
Do you think EDG is just completely boom then?
Yeah, I think they can beat AHQ to tie for third.
I think that's completely boom as far as they're considering.
That's it. West Doors Bramble Vest, not going to work twice. They're going to have a counter.
I don't think it worked once. I think everything else worked.
What are you talking about? As soon as they saved up and then he sold it
base
at
analysis,
50 minutes?
Bramble Vest on Corky, 100% win rate.
I think this is a good time to kind of jump into the NA rabbit hole of why do they always do well in week 1 and then fail in week 2, and why at least this year for Immortals and C9, I'm a little bit more confident in the last years, is like C9 has just been executing very well, and it doesn't seem like it's because people don't know what they're going to do, so to speak. Like they're trying to target their strategy, and C9's still pulling it off anyway, and they have been doing it since the play-in stage, so it's already like week 3 for them technically.
And they're not doing a singular strategy, right? If you remember, I know this is going to be difficult for you guys, but remember 2 years ago, back to the 0-10 second week, it was Cloud9 with the sieging with the Veigar strategy.
Veigar Trist.
They got multiple wins off of that early on, and we were all nervous going into week 2. Having watched those games, we were all like, oh man, they not too varied of strategies
was
here.
Was that the CLG year too, where it was just on a first pick every game as well?
Yeah, well, legitimately, CLG was 2-1, C9 was 3-0, TSM was 1-2, and then the week was 0-9 plus a lost tiebreaker for 0-10.
Yeah.
And then last year was triple 2-1, and everyone went 1-2 the next week with a loss to Albus Nox Luna and that kind of stuff.
There was a lot of champion-based stuff that year, right? You were like, okay, so much of the wins hinge on X champion. And I don't feel like this year it's the same scenario.
Yeah,
I definitely agree. I think, all the points that you're saying about C9 are pretty true about Immortals as well. Playing through bot lane, they have been playing kind of the same way that they've been playing for a long time. They've shown a lot of the same mistakes that they've been showing for a long time. One of the things that kind of gave me confidence in the NA teams is I think that, especially for C9 and Immortals, they showed the same strengths that they had in NA. They've showed the same weaknesses that they have in NA. This is just telling me, well, they're playing around their level, and their level is this.
Yeah. Do you have any new things? Like, is it just going to be SKT, C9, HQ, and EDG at the bottom? Vedius?
I think, I'm surprised by Cloud9 coming into group stages. I thought that their playstyle was super linear. As you guys have rightly identified, they're playing exactly the same way that I think they had been since playoffs. And Dignitas beat them, right? Like, it was 3-1 to
They did. They
Dig.
beat them 3-1 in, like, a really crazy fourth game.
Right. And you see them again play against COG, and they seem to just be all around much better, and that's how they qualify for Worlds. And I'm thinking, but I still
Impact really stepped up since
he
then.
has exactly
been a big
that.
difference.
And I think that like watching C9, I was like, okay, for them to properly play around this mid strategy, they need everybody to step up individually, because you have to have Sneaky also not losing bot lane 2 versus 2 and Impact.
To his credit, I think Sneaky has been good.
Exactly that, and I just think you've got a lot of individuals stepping up, and it's still allowing them to play the strat that they know. And also, I just think their team fighting later on has gotten better too. So I think that Cloud9 seem to have boot camped pretty well. They seem to have learned a fair amount, but also a lot of praise to the Shen pick into Scout, because I think that if what they said is if what we believe to be true, and that they actually
hard counter to the player,
then I think that was smart.
It was so funny, the all in from Scout with Lucian at that moment.
That tilted me so bad.
Exactly. You're watching Jensen's movement and you're like, wow, that bait is way too obvious. He knows they have a level 6 Shen, right? He knows they can't see any of the other members. That's way too obvious. He'll never. Oh God, Scout, wait for it.
Yeah, and let's talk about the tragedy of EDG for a little bit.
And then he did it again.
Scout goes one way, full steam ahead. But let's talk about the tragedy of EDG, because they had a 10,000 gold late game lead against AHQ and a 10,000 gold early game lead against SKT. If they play like a little better in the mid to late game, they're tied for first in this group. Like, should we be saying they're a super boom?
I still have some faith. Maybe I shouldn't, but I had faith in them going into this group. So I don't think it's as clear cut, because I also think
most of us would have put them second or third for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think I had them second.
I had them second, yeah.
You know, SKT has also kind of shown some weakness, although they did win all their games, right? They did have some chances to lose. And one of the big things to me about EDG, I think their biggest problem is they just think about how they're supposed to win, not about how their opponents are supposed to win. It's like, well, I'm Lucian in Syndra, so I play aggressive and I kill him. Great. Oh, wait, they have a Shen. That's how they win. Okay. Thinking about
their accent?
The EDG. That wasn't even an accent.
Yeah, exactly.
EDG into SKT.
Azale always does that voice when he's like mocking.
Okay. There you go. It's just the standard Azale voice.
Got it.
So EDG into SKT, if you think about how SKT wins that game, everyone knows the only possible way they win is this crazy wombo combo where everyone groups up. And what does EDG give them, right? To me, again, they're just thinking, okay, what do we do next for our comp? Well, we shove out the mid lane. We do this. They don't think about their opponent's win conditions. And that, I think, is their biggest issue.
I really thought that even though EDG were like, okay, they had this 10,000 goal lead versus HQ, and then they lost, and then they had the same thing versus SKT. I thought those games were so completely different and left such completely different impressions on me. Like, after their one versus HQ, I was like, oh God, they are bad. Like, that was... How did they not win that game, right? Because you're just looking at all these things, and maybe some of the comical stuff like Bramble vs Corki early on and still losing and all that type of stuff led to that sort of impression, right? But the one versus SKT, I couldn't help but be super impressed in how they got that lead early on, right? Yeah. And then when they lost it, it wasn't like, they were... To me, it wasn't like they were making these huge blunders. It was small. It was like, oh, okay, there's this small pocket of fog of war on the side. And yes, you can be like, okay, you probably should not be, grouping up 4 people, next to a pocket like that when the enemy team has recon. But that to me was such a small mistake compared to their ones versus HQ that I was just like, well done, SKT.
Of course.
That engage was godlike.
They're like the only team who can pull off that comeback.
Yeah, and even after that engage happened, they still won another fight.
Yeah.
When they had the Kog'Maw go off in the bottom lane, but they just couldn't pull it together. So, like, the peaks of this team and the valleys of this team are so stark. Like, Scout deservedly flamed for the game against C9 and the late game against AHQ was like 3-0 against Faker and solo killed Westor multiple times in that game and had the best laning stats of anyone at Worlds going into that game against C9. Like, there are things about this team that worked and things that didn't work in a really big way. So, like we say with Flash Wolves, we have an 0-3 team in every group, which is actually pretty rare at Worlds. A lot of times you'll have like the double 1-2s at the bottom. Yeah. If they are not super boom, like if their mentality actually is there are enough good things about this team the LPL champions, #1 seed from China, like that could do something in this group. It's just we don't expect it based off what we've seen.
Worlds, baby.
And the funniest thing about Scout to me is I actually think he performs basically the same way in every single game.
It's just how you play against him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He
I think
doesn't
you're absolutely
change.
right about
Your
that.
opponents change because he is really good. He's super great mechanically. He's amazing as far as actually how he plays most of the time in lane. I think he's extremely dominant, but he plays with no respect to his opponents. It's almost like I'm so much better than you that it doesn't matter what you do. I will just smash this idiot. And then he plays with no respect, and Shen turns him down, or he's getting counter-ganked. He never plays, around what his opponents could do to him. So
Yeah.
you just have to play around that.
Because even the SKT game, he was face checking against like 3 people, and he just like dashed 17 times on Lucian and get 3
and he's
kills. You're
super
like,
fed.
whoa, he's so good.
Yeah.
But he face checked.
Shouldn't have been there in the first place, but he's good enough to pull it off when he's ahead.
All right, so is this C9 boom, or what's your confidence level in C9 getting out of this group? SKT's through, I think.
For sure.
We have a 100% confidence of C9 because either ADG has to come back from the grave at 03 or AHQ actually has to beat C9.
So I see C9 getting out, not because I think they're just going to slam the group in the second week, but because they have a 2-game lead over EDG.
Yeah.
I have confidence that they can beat AHQ, and that's the only game they have to win.
Yes.
Because as long as they beat AHQ and we're
SKT
saying
beats
SKT
EDG.
beats EDG,
Yeah.
which I would bet on, then that's how I think they make it out of the group. I think they could beat EDG. I think they're talking about confidence against SKT. I don't have that confidence yet, but I think it's an easy group because they have a 2-game advantage.
And the day ends. Final day of groups. The final game is SKT versus EDG. So that could potentially be the game.
The farewell
that
tour,
decides.
or
Or
the
it could
game
not
that
matter
decides.
at all.
Yeah. Will they go 0-6? Can they beat SKT? That would be sad to watch in this fans. But thank you guys for watching the 4 groups. We got Twitter questions now. We had 16 teams to talk about, which is why I think this was a little bit longer than your normal episode. Every group.
It's actually right on track for being normal.
An hour and 15 minutes?
We had a preamble for testing the audio, remember?
So it's only an hour and 10 minutes.
All right, so I'll hit you guys
Fingers
with a
crossed that
question.
this audio actually works and goes out, by the way, because
All right, first question here from Tainted Aircon. He says, EDG, Fnatic, Flash Wolves, which is the most likely to win a game? Which is the least likely? So quick hits, who do you think? I think most likely to win a game, I would say EDG. Least likely, Fnatic, I think they are boom.
The disrespect of Fenerbahce in 1907, man.
Well, he didn't ask. Maybe he's just assuming they're going to go 3-0. He has so much respect.
I think it makes a better question. I say the most likely to win a
Fnatic is the
between-
most likely to win a game. They will not lose.
Most
the
likely,
Gigabyte
who's the least
Marines.
likely then? Quick hits.
Flash Wolves.
I think the Flash Wolves are least likely. Yeah, because I already predicted in that group
man.
that they wouldn't win one. But I'm going with EDG as far as who's gonna
Win a game.
grab one.
Guys, it's Gigabyte
and then
Marines.
there was
Fnatic
Jack.
will not lose the Gigabyte Marines
Yeah.
again. they just won't.
Flash Wolves most likely to win. Fnatic most likely not to. I think they're the most boom.
All right, hype. Next question from Sean Shannon. He says, who is your standout player from each group and your Dade from each group? Do we want to just do
Yeah.
maybe one standout
A
player
quick
and one
explanation
Dade?
for the Dade Award is super hype before Worlds to largest drop off. So it has to be someone you expect it to be great.
And I'd say we just do
So-
one for the whole tournament.
So
for each.
Jat put
Right now it is Scout.
Scout number 11,
I was gonna
right?
say
Scout?
Jat put Scout on his.
Even though Dade was like 2 in
Yeah.
the year, but he also made it to the semifinals that year. And I think the Dade Award also has like ripple effects to his demise in the LPL and like the future level of Dade. But I think right
the
now,
parallels.
yeah, right now it's Scout.
Yeah, I agree with that. So who's the
But
who's the biggest standout
Scout
then?
did a lot of boosted things, but he still got good
Well,
lanes.
so-
so
really good
so
games.
hold on, because
Yeah.
that award also coming into this, we were very well aware of
His
Scout
tendencies.
and exactly the tendencies and him getting punished in the regular season. Like, yeah, the final was like amazing
Yeah.
and he super carried stuff, but we did see him do some similar stuff.
Yeah, I mean, is the Dade Award like SOAS?
What about Karsa? So I mean, I know a lot of people had like analysts had lower expectations for Karsa, but if you're looking big picture, Karsa's still very hyped up.
Yeah.
I feel like he has done nothing. Where I think Maple has been trying to drag the dead body of Flash Wolves across the finish line a few times. Karsa has been that dead body.
That's fair.
I think that's an
I
interesting
like
one.
that
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Trying to think of other like good super
Yeah.
big
You could
names.
also hit
So
with best
Mystic,
player.
I was gonna say Mystic was Mystic was hyped up as being the best AD carry at the entire tournament.
And he's had a few
By some
boo-boos.
analysts. By some.
Yeah.
Yeah, by some analysts, and I think
It was
right
Prey.
now, nobody would say like.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't say that before, but I would not say that now either.
I think that's a good list of front runners.
Who's your high highs then? Who's your best players from the first week?
So, like, best players, I actually thought the best of the Rift list from each group that I
Was
think you
pretty
guys
good.
did on the analyst
Yeah.
desk was pretty good at identifying people from each group.
Yeah.
But the biggest overperformer based on like who you're actually looking to succeed on the world stage, I think was Jensen and Contracts as like a duo. Contracts has been smashing with basically carry warrior junglers and doing a bunch of damage as
think-
well as Jensen smashing.
Haunter is another good
Yeah,
one.
Haunter, Uzi. I think
Uzi, yeah, is a good
Xiaohu
one.
has been very good
BDD
as well.
has been kick-ass.
That's a lot of players, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, we got 3-0 teams in multiple groups. All right, is that it for Twitter? You got one more?
We got one more here. And the last question is, do we want to get into this one? Because this one might be a bit longer. Okay, so can we please discuss how NA has never looked better now the LCS is reverting to BO1s? Is NA success coincidence or was it the BO3s? So first off, group stages are BO1s.
Yeah.
And while I, like my personal opinion, I'll just do it quick. While
Yeah.
I do think that BO1s makes it, it's less likely to have the best team get out of each group. I still think the best teams win the tournament every year. Faker is 19-2 in group stages.
Yep.
Korea always wins their groups. The best teams win the tournament. Yes, I think if you did, friggin' best of 5s or best of 10s or whatever for every single game, it would change who gets into quarterfinals and maybe in rare circumstances semifinals. But I think the winners are the best teams.
Yeah, and this question is a bit of a landmine because I know best of one's a pretty controversial topic. And I mean, we did an episode on the dive with Kobe and I, and then the two directors of esports, Waylon and Jared. And I think if I were to do that episode again, there's one thing that I don't think we necessarily touched on well was for the people that like best of threes, how much it hurts for that to go away, right?
Yeah.
Because there is no denying that like you are more likely to find like the best team in every regular season match playing 3 games versus playing 1, but I don't think by much is the thing that like why I'm still okay with best of ones in the long run. As you mentioned, Korean teams absolutely
TSM
dominating
made
that
every
stuff,
NA finals.
right? And just the way the sport goes, like you're still playing League of Legends, and League of Legends is a self-contained game with elements that come from outside the game and pre-series adaptation. That's another thing about like G2 and why the best of one argument tilts me. Or why when I heard like Maxlor say, well, I don't know how to play in the group stage. I've never played best of ones before. Have you played game 1 of a 3-game series? Congrats, that's your best of 1. And then obviously you get to play after that. But you're still fundamentally playing the same game where you're trying to predict what your opponents do versus what you're going to do.
Yeah, I would say the thing that is different and the adaptation argument that people are making for the best of threes is one thing that wouldn't be tested on stage. And the question is how much of that can be trained and everything during, just the regular season within scrims, right? Because we're not, when you move to best of ones, obviously we're going to drop the undeniable more games and better practice of adapting on stage.
Yeah.
But if everybody comes in, whenever they're going to an international tournament and are focusing that in their scrims, like, is that similar? How much does it actually mean? How much do you learn about your team trying to adapt on the stage in the normal season? Like, is that pressure even there in the normal season?
And how much more do you learn, and this is when people will start flaming that really like best of threes, playing in higher pressure games during the regular season? Because a best of 1 is inherently higher pressure than game 1 or game 2 of a best of 3 series. And if you're not making it past group stage, then it's not going to matter what you're actually doing on stage during the regular season. So I think it's a very long discussion, and I think it's absolutely valid to hold opinions on both sides.
And I do think that best of threes, like that would provide, basically more practice and better practice. However, the discussion is mostly like, how much is that difference, right?
Exactly. And there's so many other things that influence whether or not a team is good or not. But we've had this discussion a million times. It's a long community discussion. We're not going to solve it here on the dive.
So, very small point.
Especially
then.
not in a Twitter question, probably.
Are you sure?
Deviating from that, I did see one brief question about the style.
About pocket squares?
About pocket
Crumbs
squares.
asked us, what are pocket squares and how do they work?
Yeah.
As people that never score highly on the style ranking,
Dude, I was so tilted by
I
that.
think it's a sham.
As
I
people
refuse
who
to
don't
conform
dress
to
ourselves,
pocket
aka
squares.
all the casters.
All of the casters.
That's my biggest thing with it. Like, we aren't the ones choosing this.
Yeah.
They give us an outfit and tell us to wear
you're
that.
really you're rating the person who's dressing us
Yes.
for the different people. It's like, ooh, you really fucked Azale's shit up today. But DeFigio, he's looking good.
So some people get their own stuff though. Like Shots,
yeah.
so,
Yeah.
the girls obviously both all get a
OC
lot of their
I
stuff.
think does.
I'm pretty
but
sure DeFigio got that suit himself.
He said he chose what to bring, but he doesn't choose his clothes.
Yeah, I chose what
So he
to
didn't
bring.
buy his
I have
clothes.
a bunch of stuff, but I have zero fashion sense.
I did not
don't-
choose my clothes
Dude,
or
yeah.
what to bring.
And I love not having to choose my clothes. That
It's
is my
wonderful,
favorite part of the
but
show.
I refuse to conform to pocket squares. If people are gonna put me at number 9 every week, like I don't
Yeah.
care.
Is the pocket square really what makes the outfit?
No, it's
Yeah.
the smile. That's what truly makes
According,
the outfit.
according to the fashion thread, it is.
Yeah.
I had a bunch of people in there being like, I would have put you and Jad the top 5, you know? And I was just like, yeah, clearly it's just a personal opinion.
There's going to be a debate about who gets to control this list going forward.
Yeah,
Currently, it's just this one mysterious
He's
voice.
got a monopoly.
Yeah,
It's
he's
just,
what
doing-
happens
he's
if none
doing
of the
great.
casters wear pocket squares?
it's just big pocket square. The big pocket square industry trying to warp all our opinions. He's like, on day 16, he's like, by the way, I know a great website where you could buy some pocket squares.
All right. Well, aside from seeing who's going to make it out of groups, we're going to get to see how many pocket squares we wear in League 2. Thank you guys for joining us for the dive this week. Thank you, Vedius, for
having
joining
me.
us. Just
Great
a shout
job,
out
Vedius.
to those people that are actually listening to the end of the episode. World starts 3 hours earlier than it did last
Oh, it
week because
does.
of the possibility of tiebreakers. So make sure, whatever time zone you were tuning in, 3 hours before that is when the group stages are going to start on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And yeah, we'll see you there.